y'all, it's Mickey, and I have more than 100 subscribers on here. Thank you to all of my new subscribers, people who have subscribed in the last month or so. I really appreciate it. I am so flattered by the idea that people want to hear me talk about anything. So thank you so much for subscribing, and I really hope that you stick around after this video, because I got some thoughts about some things that I don't know how well they're gonna go down with people. So a comrade at Just a Dust Jacket posted a video a couple of weeks ago, I think it was like 2 weeks ago, about called Confessions of a Book Snob, and it was basically about how he's been accused of being a book snob, and how he kind of doesn't think that being a book snob is necessarily a bad thing, that there's nothing wrong with kind of having certain standards about things, and how he kind of thinks that people should be willing to challenge themselves as readers and kind of think outside of the box. Or that's at least what I got from the video. And I kind of wanted to address that video because it's something that I have been thinking about, I've thought about before, and there was just like a lot of really interesting commentary in the video itself and in the comments that I really kind of wanted to address, because I just have like a ton of thoughts about it. The reasons why this topic kind of matters to me is because at one point there was a time when I saw a lot of articles, mostly book articles in the blogosphere, that was admonishing the concept of book snobbery. They were basically talking about how they really thought that it was very wrong for people to go around judging others and other people's taste in books. And on one hand, I agreed with a lot of what those articles said. I don't think that it's fair to make assumptions about people based on what they read. I don't think you can really determine that much about a person's character or intelligence or sophistication based on their choice in literature, and I don't think that it's fair to make anybody feel ashamed for what they read. However, I also didn't like the way that I felt sometimes that those articles try to make it seem as if all books are created equal. That's like the idea that we can kind of judge all books in like the same manner, that there isn't a such thing as some books that have a higher literary value than others. Like it was an underlying tone or message in some of those articles that I really didn't like. So I have been accused by some people of being a bit snobbish. I am somewhat picky not about music and books and films, and it's weird because I'm not necessarily picky about what I consume. I will pretty much read, watch, and listen to anything, but I am critical of it when I do so, and a lot of people I know don't like that. They just want to enjoy it. They don't want to think about how well it works or how well it's constructed, or if it's are the characters fully developed, or does things make sense. They just want to kind of enjoy the overall experiences, and they don't really want to look that deep into it. So they get really mad at me when I do that, and they get kind of defensive sometimes, because they kind of feel like, especially when it's something that they really care about, they feel a little bit like I'm picking at them. And so I try really hard not to do that very often, but sometimes I slip up. I can be a bit of a know-it-all sometimes, I can admit that, and I can kind of offend people because I don't get it. It's a feeling that I don't really understand. I can talk about how badly constructed a book was, and how poor the characters are, and how bad the writing is, and then in the same breath talk about how I enjoyed every second of it and how I would read it again. Like, I can look at the flaws and things that I like and still like them, but there's some people I know, and a lot of people out there that don't particularly like to do that. So I don't want to say they get easily offended, but they do get offended if I say something like, man, that movie was bad. I liked it, but it was a bad movie. Like, to them, that just doesn't make any sense. And maybe it really doesn't make sense, but it does completely in my little world. So it's a topic, I guess, that matters to me, because I think that the best way to be able to have discussions about books is to be able to talk about the flaws that we see in them. Like, if I come to someone and I tell them that I think, you know, the plot in this book is poorly developed, if you can come to me and tell me all the reasons why you don't think so, like, now we're having a conversation, we're having a dialogue about things. But if I say I think the plot in this book is like poorly developed, and your reaction is you're wrong and you suck and I don't want to talk to you anymore, like, that is not really constructive and it doesn't really make any sense. And it's also typically a sign that you might think I'm right, but you don't want to acknowledge that. For some reason, there's a lot of people who think that if they acknowledge the flaws in their favorites things, then those things can no longer be their favorites. Like, everything is kind of on this weird sort of extreme. Either a book is the best book ever or it's the worst book ever, and there's like no in between. And I don't see the world that way. I don't see books that way. And so it causes some friction sometimes, mostly in real life, not online, because I'm pretty good at censoring myself online. But and just being careful and acknowledging other people's feelings before I talk. But when I'm like really comfortable with people and stuff, I might just say stuff that later on I realize, man, I just kind of pissed that person off. So I am really kind of I feel a certain type of way about that title of snobbishness. I think that there's nothing wrong with being critical of books and criticizing the things that are going on in books, but when you take that criticism of books and turn it into a criticism of the reader themselves, that's when I think it becomes a problem. And so yeah, and so that's sort of like, to me, what I think is the good side of book snobbery. I think that it is good to challenge people's ideas about books and to question, you know, why they like things, and to be critical of works of art. Where book snobbery becomes a problem, though, is when people take their experiences of the world and then use them kind of as the benchmark for which they judge everybody else's experiences. One thing that I noticed in the comments about on Conrad's video, when people were talking about the concept of challenging yourself and reading more challenging out of the box reads, was that people were being super prescriptive about what that means. For the most part, when people were talking about challenging reads, what they were talking about were classics or literary fiction. That's pretty much how they viewed it. You know, they were under this comment saying like, yeah, people need to read more classics. I read this classic in like middle school. I don't know how these people have managed to go this long without reading it. These people aren't challenging themselves. They need to read better books. They're not reading good books. And I was just sort of like, man, it just got kind of like pretentious and a little bit like, well, definitely not a good tactic to go about trying to get people to read things. It didn't really feel, it felt like basically what these people were doing is they were coming from their own reading histories and their own education situations, and they weren't thinking about the fact that there were people whose experiences are just completely different from theirs. One concept that kept coming up over and over, one phrase, was the phrase of being well read. And I actually really appreciated the comment section, because there were a lot of people who were kind of trying to figure out, how do you define that phrase? What does it mean to be well read? And I don't feel like, and I read a lot of comments about it, and I don't feel like anybody was able to really particularly articulate that. I don't think that there's any like objective meaning for that phrase, but it is a concept though that I feel like a lot of people are always judging others by. You know, is this person very well read, or is this person very underread? When I started my MFA for English, I felt completely underread compared to my classmates. My classmates had read Faulkner and Hemingway and Melville and all of these other authors that I had never read before, and then there were also like handfuls of authors who I had never even heard of that they had read, and I felt really underread. I felt like, oh my gosh, what have I been doing with my life? But the more that as I progressed through my degree and the more that I got to know people, started talking to people, I realized that while there were a lot of holes in my reading history, there were a whole lot of holes in their reading history too. Like, I hadn't read Faulkner and Melville and Flannery O'Connor and authors like that, but I had read Ralph Ellison, I had read Toni Morrison, I had read Nello Larson, I had read Chester Himes. Like, I had a totally kind of different experience in reading that they didn't have, and I realized that that was partially because of our education and our subject positions in the world. I grew up in Detroit. I was a DPS kid. My school was majority black and all of my English teachers were black, and we focused a whole lot on African American literature in high school. And because I'm black and because I had that experience in high school, when I got older and I looked for books of pleasure, African American authors were the books that I usually turned to. But that was not the same case for my peers who were mostly white males. They grew up reading, you know, Faulkner and Melville. Hemingway, you know, spoke to them when they were like a 19-year-old kid, but he didn't speak to me when I was a 19-year-old girl and 19-year-old person. Blah. But he didn't speak to me as a 19-year-old, and so we just were coming at the world from different places. And so yes, I had holes in my reading, but they also had holes in their reading, and I don't feel like either of our reading histories was more valid than the others. And I feel like sometimes when we start discussing like who's well read and who's not, we prioritize our idea of what's good literature, of what is you know, we prioritize what we think is good literature and decide that if people haven't read those things, then they haven't read anything. And I think that that's really unfair, and we really shouldn't do that. I also think that when we talk about challenging people, that we have to again make sure that we are looking at it from that person's perspective. One of the books that Conrad was talking about that he was saying like a lot of people were reading and he kind of wished that they were reading something that was better was A Little Life by Hanya Yanagihara. I don't really know how to say it, I'm sorry. But it's a book that's been all over Booktube, and he was definitely, I feel like a huge part of that rant was more so him kind of lamenting the fact that this book is just kind of being, he felt like this book was kind of being pushed by publishers and being advertised all over the place. But he was also just sort of saying that, you know, there are much better, more challenging reads out there. But the thing about that book is I know a lot of people who, for them, reading A Little Life would be a huge challenge. The length of that book and its subject matter would be something that would be extremely intimidating to them. And so for them, reading that book would be them branching off out of their comfort zone. It would be them doing something that challenges them and stretches them. And I think that that experience is valid, and people should take that experience into consideration. I feel like when we become really prescriptive about the ways in which people should challenge themselves, when we have like specific pieces of work that we feel people should read, or specific pieces of work that we just think, you know, are the best thing ever and this is what people should do, we can become a bit abrasive. I think there's a huge difference between highly recommending something, saying, you know, this book is great, and effusing all the things about it that is great and the ways that you feel that it will change a person, and requiring it of someone. You know, I think it's one thing to say that people should read Ulysses, that you think that there's a lot of value in that book. I think it's another thing to say that if you don't read Ulysses, you aren't challenging yourself and you're not doing blah blah blah. And that's not what I think Conrad was saying at all. I don't think that he meant that, but I know some people who do think that. I know some people who have like a list of authors or a list of books that they're like, if these people haven't read those books, then these people don't know what they're doing with their lives and they need to do something better. And they will judge people negatively on that. And I think that that's where book snobbery really goes wrong. It's just you're taking your own perspective and making it it's basically a superiority complex. You're taking your own perspective and claiming it as the right one when there are just many ways that people can approach something. So that is my thoughts on this topic. I hope I didn't ramble too much. I have 2 questions that I would love for you guys to answer in the comment box. And the first one is, what has your personal reading history been like? What types of books did you read in high school, and how has that changed over time? And 2, how would you define a challenging book? I would really like to know those answers to those questions, and if you want to respond to anything else that I said, I would love it. I'm gonna link Comrade's video down below because I think that you should watch it, and I'm also gonna link Juanita at Paperbacks and Cats' video because she had some really valid comments that she made too that I think are really interesting and I think people should look at. So yep, that's all I have to say for today. Hope you guys are fine. Bye.